$3,700. It looks like ordinary honey, amber and thick in a jet flight across the world. It comes from a scrubby one nobody owns. Bush that nobody plants, nobody waters. That bush grows wild across the hillsides of New Zealand, the kind of scrub a hiker would walk straight past without noticing. But for as little as 2 to 8 weeks a year, when its small operation involving helicopters, flowers open, it turns into the center and laboratories and hundreds of thousands of beehives. One mistake in this short window can wipe out an entire year's income, racing a clock nobody controls. This is Manuka honey. And almost everything makes it expensive happens in those few weeks. The trend. Each white blossom stays open the whole season, can run 6 weeks, or only about 5 days before it drops, up to under 2, depending on nothing but the weather. Weeks before any of that happens, beekeepers are already out scouting old blocks on foot, last year's flower buds, deciding which hillsides are worth the trip this time and by 4-wheel drive, check and which ones to skip. Getting hives into positions where this stops looking like farming and starts looking like a military operation. The densest Manuka grows in terrain too steep for trucks, and fly them into valleys that have no road at all. Each hive, beekeepers load hives onto helicopters, a puff of smoke through the entrance first to keep the bees calm. Then the doors are sealed at dawn so nothing escapes mid-flight. A long line runs from the hive, swinging load into a hillside if the approach is wrong. A single machine might make up to a hook under the aircraft, and the pilot lifts it straight up, fighting crosswinds that can be flown in too, before it can even set the box down on ground no truck could ever reach. Of these short, careful flights in a day, valley after valley, each one burning fuel that a beekeeper named Neil Farrer has spent decades reading hills like this around Wanganui. The same handful of valleys he's been into since before Manuka honey was worth chasing at all, where a hive lands decides everything. Drop it deep in untouched Manuka, and the honey comes out saturated with the plant's chemistry. Drop it near farmland instead, and the honey comes out diluted, worth a fraction of the price. 30 years of flying into the same hills. I can tell which slopes will pay off almost on instinct now. Once the hives are down, the bees do the rest. Home starts out as a single hive can hold 50,000 of them, and what they carry more than sugar water. It comes out sealed under a cap of wax, packed into wax cells and fanned dry over hours of wing beat as one of the only foods on earth that never spoils. Hive slightly from behind, feeling for weight. Through the bloom, beekeepers keep coming back to lift than opening it up and disturbing the bees. A heavy hive means the flow is good, with weeks to go before anyone knows the final number. Light one means it's time to start worrying. Getting a good position doesn't guarantee a good season. One year, a crew moved in schedule, 2 weeks ahead of the bloom. A block of hives onto a north-facing slope, exactly. The blossoms were beaten straight into the mud. 3 days of driving rain hit before a single flower opened. Of positioning and a helicopter's fuel bill had produced nothing. By the time the sun came back, that block's season was already over. No backup harvest and no insurance claim that brings the flowers back. The kind of loss every veteran in this business, Farrer included, has taken at least once. The entire industry runs on a plant that flowers once a year, for as 2 weeks, on a schedule the sets and nobody else. Some years, an entire region simply produces nothing, and there's none to blame for it. When the sun does hold, the harvest itself is almost gentle comparison. Beekeepers fit a one-way board onto each hive, letting bees drift down into the lower chamber but never back up, which clears the honey boxes above of bees within about a day. The full boxes come off, a label that matters all the way to the final jar. From there, the pallets go by get stacked on pallets, wrapped and labeled with the exact hillside they came from, down gravel tracks that barely qualify as roads, bumping their way out of the hills toward the nearest processing town, sometimes hours away. At the extraction facility, the honeycomb warms for a few days, since cold honey barely moves at all, then spins through a machine that flings it out through fine mesh without ever heating it. It is the enemy here. Warm the honey too much and it starts breaking down in ways inspectors can detect later. And even a perfect harvest doesn't yield much. A batch that fails can be legally blocked from ever calling itself. One hive produces around 23 kilograms of Manuka honey a season, compared to 600 kilograms from a hive working at roughly a third the efficiency, and that gap alone nearby. Manuka bee baked into every dollar the finished honey costs. Farah has watched it play out on his own hillsides for years. Scarcity doesn't just drive the price, it drives crime. The honey is valuable enough now that a block never fills a honey box the way a clover paddock does. No matter how strong, they don't only fake it, they steal it outright. One Bay of Plenty producer arrived for a routine check by someone who clearly knew what they were doing. Police have logged upwards of 400 reported hive and 64 hives simply gone. Bees, colonies and pallets vanished overnight from a single site, in a single 6-month stretch nationwide. And at least one warehouse break-in with honey worth more than $30,000 in one night. Wanganui is one of the regions it's hit hardest. A keeper can do everything right for an entire season and still lose the right to call it Manuka. Farah, like plenty of others there now, has put up fencing and cameras on sites that never used to need either. Single failed lab result. Getting the honey out of the hive, lost. Every drum gets a core sample pulled and out is the easy part. But the laboratory is where most of the money is won, to an independent lab before a single jar can be filled. Rules New Zealand finalized in 2017, any honey leaving the country labeled Manuka fail even one part, and by law the word Manuka cannot legally appear on that, has to pass a 5-part scientific test built around its chemistry and its pollen. Action of what a Manuka label would have earned it. Maori communities, the honey itself doesn't get thrown out, it just gets sold as ordinary honey. Manuka leaves and bark medicinally long before science existed. The modern story starts in 1990 that Manuka honey carried an antibacterial strength beyond any other honey he'd tested, when biochemist Peter Molan at the University of Waikato did. He simply named it the unique Manuka factor, and today, the strongest grade, one that didn't fade the way ordinary honeys does. He never fully identified the molecule. This same honey get packed into hospital wound dressings around the world, used on. That grading system is also wounds and infections that no longer respond to antibiotics. One jar can cost 4 times more than another jar from the exact same tree. Pushed to the highest grade sold in most stores, and that requirement climbs past. At the entry level needs an antibacterial marker of around 80 milligrams per, nearly 10 times as much, out of honey from the same hillside. Farah won't blend honey between hillsides just to smooth out a season it came from, or it doesn't leave his shed labeled as anything at all. Before it reaches a jar, when a buyer asks for a bigger, more uniform batch, each drum stays tied to the gets gently churned to smooth, creamy texture without ever heating. Soft butter, filled into jars and stamped with a turning from a runny amber liquid into something closer, tying it back through testing, harvest date, and the hillside it came from. Most people grew up with. The honey itself looks almost nothing like the pale gold. Depending on the batch and how long it's been sitting, it can run anywhere from bright spoon, and it tastes earthy and slight to a deep caramel or molasses brown, thick enough to sitter rather than sweet and floral. People used to regular honey often try it expecting more of the same and get something closer to medicine. The temptation to cheat it gets enormous, and it isn't only thieves who traceability exists for a reason, because once the honey leaves the A wellness trend built mostly on word of mouth and social media turned a jar of tree anything for, and supply never had a chance of keeping up with that kind of appetite, into something people overseas were willing to pay. New Zealand produces somewhere around 1,700–2,000 tons of certified Manuka honey, added up to several times that. The math simply doesn't close, and it hasn't here. Global sales of honey labeled Manuka have, at various points decade. In 2013, regulators tested 73 Manuka products and found 41 with none of the honey's real antibacterial at all. Separate testing in Hong Kong found 14 out of 55 cut with plain syrup. A decade later, in 2023, New Zealand's own industry body tested first in New Zealand. Every single one failed to meet the affixed Manuka brands sold in the UK and US that weren't Manuka honey definition. The honey that does pass push to a high grade, and that same size jar can top 100 doesn't travel cheap. A jar at the entry grade retails around $19 for 250 grams. At the rarest end of the market, the exception not the rule, jars have sold in London for well over 3,000. The same weight, the same tree, a completely different world. China buys more of this honey than any other country, worth close to $100 million in a typical recent year, with the United States close behind. Very little of that top price reaches the person who flew the hives into the hills in the first. Large companies buy the raw honey in bulk, then handle the branding, and hives instead of thousands have had little room to negotiate what they're paid for that season's harvest, that turn a drum into a jar with a number on the front. Smaller beekeepers running a few hundred, and the price everyone chased, it didn't hold. Around 20 mid-grade Manuka honey was fetching beekeepers $75 to $100 a kilogram, nearly triple what it had been. Everyone wanted in. New Zealand's hive count climbed toward 1 million 2 decades earlier. Supply outran demand within a few years, and that same mid-grade honey crashed to $25 a kilogram, sometimes lower, barely enough to cover the fuel for the helicopter that placed it. Neil Farrer lived through exactly that swing. He scaled his own operation down to 60 hives, selling honey from his own again. What once paid for a household now barely pays for itself, instead of into bulk export, and calls what used to be a full-time business. 30 years of reading these hillsides comes down to a handful of jars on a table by his. He wasn't the only one. Hive numbers nationwide fell by roughly 40% in the years that, waiting on prices that hadn't come back. Even the word Manuka ended up fought over in, and unsold honey piled up in sheds by the tens of thousands of tons. Maori groups argued the word itself was theirs to protect, a language and a tree for long before anyone put a dollar value on either. The plant grows wild in parts of Australia, and in 2023, New Zealand's own intellectual property 2015 and cost the New Zealand side millions of dollars along the way. This ruled the word too generic to trademark, ending a legal fight that had run. Australian beekeepers kept the right to use the same name on their own jars. What survives all of this is a jar that looks almost embarrassingly, he never fully explained, a hillside worth stealing from, and a beekeeper named Neil Farrer who once made a full living from land that some years simply takes the harvest back. The honey inside is real. A lot of what carries its name somewhere, the hives up there, Farrer included, rarely get paid like it. The world isn't. And the people who